Hello, Discord. I, as a YouTuber, occasionally have a problem, and that is that sometimes I have too many ideas to fit a release schedule, because I've noticed that YouTube tends to prioritize whatever I've released most recently, and that it becomes deprioritized when I release something new. But having this Discord gives me a place to basically put up content early. So if you're into that, check out the Discord notifications for that happening more often. It'll give you a thing to do here. And if you're part of the YouTube audience that's seeing this a lot later, and maybe even a little bit after it's super relevant to you, well, you could always join the Discord to see videos like this earlier in the future. So with that, let's get on to the topic, which is kind of breaking news out of the JP side revolving around the 5th anniversary. And my overall takeaway here is that there is a lot to like about this. I don't remember if I actually published this take because it felt kind of doomery, but it also felt incredibly likely that, especially with Tactics finally getting a really respectful upgrade to its characters, that there would be some sort of a huge power spike coming that would make them quickly irrelevant again. And we've seen this a lot with anniversaries. This is when they introduce things like the reincarnation system, or back in FFBE, I remember all the hype around Neo Visions and all of that kind of stuff. The ability to brave shift and just all sorts of things that just blow the capabilities of everything that came before it out of the water. And we've seen changes like that recently. I mean, the whole introduction of the reincarnation system and the slog that still is, even though it has slowly gotten easier over time, it still doesn't feel like that system is easy enough to like 0 to 100 that it should be built upon at this point. So I'm really glad with the overall direction. I think that's a really good news for people who want to invest in Final Fantasy Tactics, which would be the next collaboration coming for the global side, because it means that those units are probably going to be powerful for quite a bit longer, especially if we hear news. And honestly, because it's a teaser and none of these things are in game and it's just a live stream, I don't want to put too much into the promises here. Instead, I would rather see how some of these things pan out. Because maybe it is the case that the Master Ability 3 is so expansive that it actually brings very old characters back up to relevance. Maybe, and this seems hard to imagine considering how much was done for the Final Fantasy Tactics characters, but maybe it's possible that the Master Ability 3 is even more powerful than that upgrade and it makes them irrelevant again. But even in that scenario, that means we're getting maximal upgrades for all of the older units, which is, while it's in keeping with the Final Fantasy Tactics curse in this game, it would actually be a net massive win. But I don't think that it's really that strong. I would imagine that the MA3 is maybe about twice as powerful as the MA2 in addition to it all. Because especially looking at some of the first characters that are getting this, we're seeing original Ketone and the first UR Helena, which are characters from like the first and second year of the game, and neither of which have really been competitively viable for a long time, although in maybe a specific niche, they are still potentially acceptable edge cases. I mean, Helena is still a damage dealer, and Ketone is still very good at dodging things. They just don't stack up to newer units anymore. And with those being some of the characters that we're seeing upgraded in this way first, that gives me some hope that the upgrades will be powerful enough to at least make me want to consider running this new version of Ketone over the Halloween Lucio that I just pulled. Otherwise, what's the point? It's especially interesting for her because she would be a really great combination with Riku, especially now that, and this is one of the QOL updates, and maybe a little out of place in this video, but I wanted to mention it now. But Dagger and Ninja Blade have finally been combined into the same job, which is great. I'm going to have to re-look at their cards to see if this really fixes things, because both of them needed a lot. And I think there was a little bit there wasn't a lot of overlap between them, so they should be able to get a pretty comprehensive set of vision cards out of combining them, which is going to make all of them a lot more viable, especially if you have newer vision cards. And this is going to be a big help for Katone, and also a thing that's going to pretty much guarantee that she'll be able to work with Riku, who is a lot more likely a Dagger unit. And that's pretty cool, because Katone herself is a free unit. Now, will this mean that you actually want to invest in reincarnating Katone? I don't think that's going to be the case, but it does seem like the Master Ability 3s are being rolled out very slowly. And also, thankfully, like really selectively, it feels like each of the MA3s that's already been announced either synergizes with a character that we currently have on the JP side that was released maybe over the last month. So they're just going to make your newer pools better, kind of giving older players a way to boost up new characters that really respects the time and years that we put into this game. But also, I just think it's really fun to do it this way, because it definitely, instead of doing this in big waves, which honestly is what I want, because at this trickle of a pace, it's going to take forever. But hopefully, maybe they're doing a lot of other things. They are implementing a lot of new systems. So maybe there will be a point where their workload can slim down to the point where they can work on doing more of these at once. But seeing them so selectively, I think, is very interesting, because it implies kind of a intelligent design to the meta. Ways of giving specific things support, and also meaning that those characters, while their upgrade alone might not be the best over time, it could give them specifically what they need to work really well with the new character you might also want. Another bonus that feels like it was actually ripped from some content that I made about how the game should be upgraded is the Commander bonus. I don't remember if I mentioned that it would be interesting to see something like this as like a supplement to the VC system, because I think in the video I was mainly thinking about just running it through the way that Master abilities have party effects and just amplifying those so that you could stack these abilities within your team. But that also means that none of them would be super consequential. The advantage to putting it in its own slot means that you can make the effects really powerful, especially if you max out this character that otherwise you would basically have no reason to max out. Then you actually can incentivize using those characters, even though it's not necessarily in a combat role. They are now essentially an accessory or an additional vision card to your team, but a powerful one. And a reason to build these older units, because, I don't know, unless they rework select quests or some of this other stuff, there isn't really a good reason to build a lot of limited units. At least, not until we start talking about Grand Arena, but I'll get to that in a second. And this is just such a cool concept, and it feels ripped from the fan community and ripped from some of the official things, but like put back into the game, and I really like it. It reminds me of a certain era of RNJ's hosted tournaments. Guy has such a great announcer voice. But before we move into Grand Arena, I do want to say that I think that both of these things, the Master Ability 3s, and which seem to be hitting new and old units alike, with, I think, the newest of the set that's coming within the next few months being Alaya the Alabaster. Being Alaya the Alabaster, so maybe not super new, but some relatively recent units are included in this. And I'm just happy to see her get another upgrade. I think she's still great, and I think that with some modernization, she could perform with the best of them still. But the commander bonuses seem like they're going to be more specifically rolling out to the more original characters of the game, some of the earliest and lowest of cost. So there's not going to be a huge amount of overlap here, because these characters have to be kind of in a sweet spot to where they can be relevant at something. And I think that, Catone's something being the niche of Earth Evasion at this current moment, especially with Riku coming as an Earth Evasion unit, with the collaboration that's coming with the 5th anniversary, that's definitely going to be a good time for her to shine. But I do think that there's a certain point in which it's going to be really hard, unless some of the MA3s are way more stacked than others, to catch up some of these older units. So completely avoiding incentivizing you to use them in battle entirely by making them really great commanders really reminds me of my veterancy idea. The idea to say, these characters have been fighting the War of the Visions for a very long time. They're very experienced. I've had them on my team for years. They know what they're doing. They may not be the strongest, but they do have tactical knowledge, right? They are at least well experienced. Maybe there's some way that we can use that very real story experience to their benefit, and I think the idea of having a team commander is a really great way of utilizing that. Also, this applies to everything. Okay, maybe not everything. I do remember there were only a few types, but this should apply to PvP, both arena, guild battle, but also quests. So this is something that is probably, if you have a good commander, and who knows what that's going to be right off the bat, because we don't necessarily have anything but mock-ups of the system. There's nothing that's telling us that that's exactly how it's going to be, or that in a month they're not going to say, okay, well, this needs to be a lot stronger to actually work. People aren't using it as much, and we need to make these boosts stronger. Everything is still in flux. It hasn't even been implemented in the game yet, so we don't really have a baseline for what it's going to be like. But speaking of using more units in PvP, but also a broader variety of units, and seeing two different styles of upgrade, which absolutely could overlap on certain older units. For instance, it would be really great if Catone was also a great commander. That way, if you're not using her in battle, maybe you could just put her on your Earth Evasion team as a commander to boost the evasive potential of that whole team, since that is very strongly her niche. I think that would be and probably, hopefully, will be a beautiful way to upgrade the game and make, people who have a longer term investment in this game happy, while also just making things easier for new players, because now you have this whole new extra layer of stats, much like reincarnation, much like trust runes, much like the sub-vision card slot. There's these days in this game where the power level just increases because all of a sudden you can now stack in something that just wasn't there before, and Commander is going to be a lot like that for a lot of different types of content. So in terms of PvE content, this should make things a bit easier, and especially if this is a really powerful effect, and it seems like it will be, maybe kind of on the level of the MA3, but spread across your party. This could be really cool, and also really helpful for getting people started into the game. Don't even get me started on the pulls and how ridiculously good those seem to be. The guaranteed pulls, the pull 3 URs up to Lilith. Wow, that's a really good one. It almost makes me question what my Day of the Visions medals are for, but maybe that's just some future unit, Maybe this is, for instance, how I get Exia for my water account. Because Exia, unfortunately, is just a little bit too new to be on this particular banner, which will be coming in about a month, and will be absolutely free as well. It's pretty ridiculous. So, while there are some other updates to talk about, I'm going to skip a couple of those just to talk about Grand Arena because I'm really excited for this idea. And it's basically a 5-on-5 arena format, which is already very exciting. There's a lot of 5-on-5 team building that... There's a lot of possibilities and dynamic changes, etc. for 5v5 team building when we've been locked basically exclusively in 3v3 PvP for so long. But the thing that I find really exciting and fascinating about this is that there could be limitations of building teams based on nations. There could be all sorts of thematic limitations. There could even be, say, cost or rarity level limitations, like a oops, no URs format, or a format that at least removes all of the 100 cost units. Maybe a format that requires you to fight with your best sub-MR characters. A full team of 5 of them. This is also going to be a format that's going to be a bit better for older players whose collections of cards run deeper, collections of older units run deeper, especially with an emphasis on some of the lesser rarity characters, really giving them a purpose. There's now actually kind of a reason to build some of these characters. Again, I still wish they would adopt the strategy that I recommended by taking a lot of the older characters and lower rarity characters and just like cutting in half, if not cutting into fourth, the reincarnation requirements to get them maximized. But at the same time, that might start to make the reincarnation system easy enough that people are rushing through that, at which point I think they'll have a little bit more of a developmental incentive to build on a new system to the game. Whereas this is going to kind of slow that down as you're now building more characters for more reasons, at least if you're competing in Grand Arena, and hopefully the rewards are worth it. And it seems like they could be. I heard something about weapons being offered. That sounds like it could be really cool. I'm thinking about, what was it called, like Dark Shadows or something, the Dark Bahamut event recurring in FFBE that had the dark weapons in each type. That were all like, they were like legendary reliquaries times 2. And if it's that would be a really fun format to play in. But also, it would be the only PvP format that doesn't have a Veritas associated with it. It might be cool if we could get like maybe even universal Veritas tokens from the Grand Arena format that let us choose our own Veritas, especially as we're seeing Veritas centric content by the way of the unlocking of the Veritas of the Dark. There's also been some limited upgrades to how you can trade for Hollow Vision card shards, which make them a little bit easier to come by, although they are going to be more expensive than regular Vision card stuff to acquire in these ways, so still kind of a pain in the ass and definitely still annoying to pull, but there's still a lot of positive news here, and this is some kind of an improvement. There's at least a couple of people who have been asking for this as their player comment in game since the system came out. So I know that's going to make at least one person happy out there. And then to talk about some of the flashy stuff and kind of give you a reminder of what's coming for us as well. The collaboration that is coming in 1 month is going to be Final Fantasy X-2, featuring all 3 of the main characters. Pain is going to be a free 90 cost unit, and she's going to be somewhere in between... She seems like maybe somewhere in between Ferris with maybe a little bit of Ashen Mont and a bit of Lilith. At least from what we can see of her right now. And she could be a really fun 90 cost unit. It's also pretty likely And maybe this reveals itself in time, as we don't have many upgrades for Veritas of the Dark yet, but it seems like they could have some strong synergies on elemental or job-based team, so they are strongly synergistic. Also, speaking of that, Veritas of the Light has a pretty strong synergy to being a kind of magical counterpoint to Yuna, as they are both powerful light gunners and should have some overlap in kind of how their debuffs should support each other. So they should be pretty powerful together as well. And then I've been covering the Earth Evasion meta for the last week and how strong that potentially is and how difficult it can be for some teams to counter it, but how it is generally possible even for the element that it counters to be able to counter it with the right setup. But it is very strong against most things and most people who aren't tech specifically against it. In a way, I kind of fear Riku being too good in this way, because then they will have to release more characters. I mean, Shrek already does this pretty damn well. Garza, who's coming soon for Global, probably does this pretty well as well. But there's already characters that deal with Earth Evasion pretty stinking good. So I'm just kind of worried about what that counterplay is going to look like for the characters that I already like to run when I'm running Earth, and kind of how that dynamic is going to be affected. And Riku herself behaves a lot like a combination of Ashen Mont and Yuffie, which makes perfect sense, but also a little bit of Halloween Alaya too, in that she can berserk multiple characters with her LB, which is just going to be a way of ruining an entire team right in the middle of their match. I mean, this could be a very dominating and overwhelming LB for her if it weren't for the fact that she's almost definitely a physical character, so you might not have as much incentive to run her at full faith. I'm not sure if she's going to be more of an HP restoring character. There's certainly ways to get HP drain onto her, but she will be able to cancel it out, which is something that we don't see a ton of yet, but is super helpful, especially in dealing with Earth post-Soddly, because he can really spread it around a team. Although this is one of the things that I find interesting about the idea of Grand Arena. He can currently, in 3v3, put HP drain on my entire team, so I don't really need any other HP drain effects necessarily. But if this were a 5v5 format, I might still need to put this on multiple other characters, and technically he can hit 5 panels with a buddy buff, but that's not going to happen. You'll hit 3 at the most, probably, but likely only 2, and maybe only 1. So I think that's going to kind of push the prioritization of larger AoE buffs, and I think that's going to be kind of cool for Exia. She has some pretty wide-ranging support skills that are going to be able to support a team of 5 nearly as well. Nearly as well as she can already very easily hit the entirety of a team of 3, even from some awkward positioning. So, just to recap, we are going to be getting multiple power upgrades, one for the overall team and for the usability of older characters, at least maybe in an alternate capacity as our commanders, allowing the oldest and most veteran characters in the game, at least so far it seems, and maybe even like lower cost characters specifically more often than not, at least from the previews we've seen so far, that seems to be the pattern, to actually have a purpose again, but also build up our teams with them and create maybe a reason to build some of these units that you haven't really wanted to build for, like selection quests or class match or any of that stuff. Maybe you have a reason for them now. There's also Master Ability 3s, which, at least at the moment from the previews, seem like they're going to be handed out pretty selectively, but should be able to, or should seem to be focused on upgrading a lot of fan favorite characters. Not necessarily ones that are or have been usable recently, and by recently I mean in the last year or two, which may not seem recent to very many of you, but I'm old. Like, especially looking at next month's previews, we got Flagbearer Reformed Glaciella, who is maybe about 2 years old, so she's at least relatively recent, and honestly, if you have a Lance-based team, she's still pretty good to this day if you don't have a better third Lance character or a modern healer. So her getting an upgrade is definitely going to see her get used. At the same time, there was a point in time where Rain kind of felt like a staple. Even when he was competitively bad, people still used the hell out of this guy. Probably all FFBE fans. Remembering whatever Neovision Rain they might have had before they came over to this game, and trying to relive their glory days. Well, those glory days may ride again in a couple of months as Rain gets his MA3. So, yeah, it's kind of all over the place, but they should definitely keep the game interesting, and they seem like they are intentionally kind of crafted to support the newer characters coming in, which could also mean that we're seeing either wind and or greatsword characters, as well as maybe fire or spear characters coming within the next month or so, at least on the JP side, that would complement these two characters. And hopefully, as long as they're doing this thoughtfully, that will cultivate a pretty cool meta for us. Those are the main upgrades, but I also want to mention what didn't happen. We didn't get a change to the level cap, we didn't get some new reincarnation system, we didn't get some reason to have to collect another 5,000 shards for each character that we own to be able to fully unlock them, as many people feared, and as I feared would leave Final Fantasy Tactics behind. Which means that right now here on Global, as it's, if you're listening to this on Discord, days away from Final Fantasy Tactics, or if you're listening to this on YouTube, Tactics Collab is here, and we have that free 120 unit. That thing is looking a lot better into the future now that we see that this is what 5th anniversary looks like than it did a month ago for me when this was first announced, because I thought, okay, finally they're getting some respect, but how long will that last? And it seems like they're probably going to have a pretty decent shelf life. I mean, they're going to have a lot of competition by way of characters with MA3s as well as new characters, but it still looks like they'll be able to compete with them, at least from what I can tell so far. That being said, again, this is all mostly just based off of the live stream, so there's only so much that I can say with real clarity on something that hasn't been implemented in either version of the game yet, and we've basically just seen previews for. But from my perspective, it all looks pretty damn well planned out, and fixes some basic issues that I've seen for a while. If I could make one more suggestion, though, make it easier to reincarnate these older characters, especially if, and this is possible, there is some incentive within the system to fully reincarnate a character like, say, the original MR Mont, all the way to get the full party effect and maximize your use of him as your commander. And that could get kind of resource intensive, especially if you have to do this for multiple characters or multiple commanders. I mean, especially if you need various commanders for various different elements or various commanders for various different job types. I mean, that alone could create a bit of a first day grind as the system hits, where if you don't have a lot of the characters that are announced as the initial commanders, you will feel an intense need to awaken some of these. Again, that's how it works. I think most likely, since it looks to be the same as the way vision cards work, it's probably, I would guess, based on the level of your character. So getting them to 140 should be enough, but maybe there's an extra bonus effect if your commander is fully reincarnated. Who knows? And frankly, if there were another big effect to fully reincarnating characters, just in general, it might make it a little bit less of a feels bad situation to do it. Because it is still, even for a new character that gets a lot out of it, something that feels like a lot of resources to dump into one point in time. Anyways, I hope you appreciated my thoughts, the slightly looser nature of them today. And I also hope that members of my Discord community appreciated getting these thoughts early, because I know that we're all thinking about them and talking about them, and really, in terms of the channel, I don't feel like I need to talk about this until maybe a month or so from now, as it's actually coming to us. Right now, I feel like it's probably more important to talk about Veritas of the Light, maybe even Veritas of the Dark, or Garusa, or the Final Fantasy Tactics characters. And I think that really making a guide of which one you should get off of your free pull is definitely the next video that I want to release for this channel. So I hope you tune in for that. Remember to like, subscribe, ring the bell, click the link in the description, send money or thoughts and prayers in the comments, whatever floats your boat. However you want to support the channel, I do appreciate it. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.